When widowed mother Rose Patterson fled St. Louis with her twin daughters to escape ruthless debt collectors, she thought answering a mail-order bride advertisement would give them a fresh start in New Mexico territory. What she discovered instead was that she'd walked straight into the trap of the same criminal who had murdered her husband and fabricated their debts. But salvation came from the most unexpected place. A half-Mexican horse trainer rejected by both cultures running a wild Mustang sanctuary in the desert. This is a story of a mother's fierce love, a man's quiet strength, and the power of chosen family to heal the deepest wounds. When past and present collide in the untamed Southwest, can love bloom in the harshest desert? If you believe in the triumph of good over evil and the healing power of unconditional love, you won't want to miss this incredible journey of courage, justice, and hope. Like and subscribe for more amazing stories that will touch your heart and restore your faith in the power of love. Widowed mother escapes lone shark's trap, finds love with half-Mexican horse whisperer. In Desert Rose, Patterson had learned to recognize the sound of approaching danger. Living in the tenements of St. Louis with twin 12-year-old daughters and mounting debts had taught her to distinguish between the ordinary footsteps of neighbors and the purposeful tread of men who came collecting what couldn't be paid. This morning, the footsteps climbing the narrow stairs to their third-floor apartment carried the unmistakable rhythm of violence barely held in check. "Lucy, Lily," Rose whispered urgently to her daughters who were sitting at the small table working on their lessons. "Pack your school bags. Only what fits inside. Close your books, anything precious." The twins looked up with eyes too old for their 12 years eyes that had learned not to question their mother's sudden commands. They had done this before moving from boarding house to boarding house, always one step ahead of creditors, who seemed to multiply faster than Rose could find work to pay them. "Are we leaving again, Mama?" Lucy asked, her voice carefully controlled, despite the fear that flickered across her delicate features. "Yes, love," Rose replied, her own hands shaking as she gathered their few valuable possessions. "And this time we're going far away, somewhere they can't follow." The footsteps had reached their landing, now accompanied by voices that made Rose's blood turn to ice. She recognized the smooth, cultured tones of Silas Creed, the man who claimed to own their debts, the man whose smile never reached his pale eyes, the man who had made increasingly explicit threats about what would happen if Rose couldn't meet her obligations. But more terrifying still was the presence of his associates, men whose brutal reputation had made them legends in St. Louis's criminal underworld. Men who specialized in making examples of debtors who couldn't pay. "Mrs. Patterson," Silas Creed's voice carried easily through the thin door, polite as always, but edged with menace. "I know you're in there. We have business to discuss." Rose's mind raced through their options. The fire escape was blocked by laundry lines and debris. The front door was their only exit, and it led directly into the hands of men who had made it clear that her daughter's welfare depended on her cooperation with their increasingly unacceptable demands. It was then that Rose remembered the letter hidden in her sewing box, a response to a desperate inquiry she had made weeks earlier when their situation had seemed hopeless. A letter from someone in New Mexico territory offering exactly the escape route she now desperately needed. "Mrs. Patterson," Creed's voice had taken on a harder edge. "My patience has limits. Open this door or we'll open it for you." Rose made her decision with the desperate courage of a mother protecting her children. Moving swiftly to the window, she opened it and looked down at the alley behind their building. 3 stories was too far to jump with the girls, but there was a fire escape on the adjacent building, and if they could reach it— "Mama, what are you doing?" Lily whispered, her dark eyes wide with terror. "Saving us," Rose replied, grimly pulling the emergency money she had hidden in her corset. Barely enough for train tickets if they were careful. Girls were going to have to be very brave. The sound of splintering wood announced that Creed's men had tired of waiting. Rose heard heavy footsteps entering their apartment as she helped Lucy climb out onto the narrow window ledge, then lifted Lily to follow her sister. "This way," Rose urged quietly, guiding her daughters along the precarious ledge toward the fire escape of the neighboring building. Behind them, she could hear voices raised in anger as the men discovered their apartment was empty. "Find them!" Creed's voice carried clearly through the broken door. "They can't have gone far." But Rose Patterson had not survived 5 years as a widow in the roughest parts of St. Louis without learning something about escape and evasion. She led her daughters down the fire escape, through back alleys, and via a circuitous route that eventually brought them to Union Station, where the westbound trains offered passage to a new life far from the men who sought to destroy the old one. As their train pulled away from St. Louis, carrying them toward the unknown territories of the American Southwest, Rose held her daughters close and tried to explain their desperate flight in terms that 12-year-olds could understand. "Are we going to live with the man from the letter?" Lucy asked, her practical nature already working to understand their new circumstances. "I hope so, loved Pio." Rose replied, though privately she harbored deep concerns about what they might find in New Mexico territory. The letter had been brief and formal, offering marriage to a suitable widow with children in exchange for household management and companionship. It had seemed like Providence when she first read it, but now fleeing across the continent with Creed's threats echoing in her memory, she wondered what kind of man would accept a mail-order bride sight unseen. "What if he doesn't like us?" Lily asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in Rose's own heart. "What if he changes his mind when he sees we're three people instead of just one?" Rose looked at her daughters, Lucy with her auburn hair and serious green eyes, Lily with her darker coloring and artistic temperament, and felt her heart clench with fierce protective love. They were good girls, intelligent and kind, and deserving of safety and happiness. Whatever awaited them in New Mexico, it had to be better than what they had left behind. "If he doesn't want us," Rose said firmly, "then we'll find another way. We'll build our own life, the three of us together. We don't need anyone who can't see how wonderful you girls are." The journey to New Mexico territory took 4 days and consumed nearly every penny Rose had managed to save. They rode in the cheapest cars, ate the plainest food, and slept sitting up in their seats, but they were free from the immediate threat of Silas Creed's violence. For the first time in months, Rose allowed herself to hope that perhaps their luck was finally changing. Esperanza Valley, New Mexico proved to be a small settlement nestled between red rock mesas and vast stretches of desert that stretched to distant purple mountains. The train depot was little more than a wooden platform beside the tracks, but the landscape around it held a stark beauty that took Rose's breath away. This was country where a person could see for miles in any direction, where the skies seemed vast enough to contain all the dreams of anyone brave enough to claim it. Rose stepped off the train with her daughters, their few possessions clutched in worn carpet bags, and looked around for the man who was supposed to meet them. The letter had been signed S. Creed and had mentioned a ranch nearby, but Rose could see no one who seemed to be waiting for arriving passengers. "Excuse me," Rose said to the station master, a weathered man whose kind eyes suggested long experience with the hopes and disappointments of frontier travelers. "I'm looking for someone named S. Creed. He was supposed to meet the train." The station master's expression grew troubled at the mention of the name. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to be looking for Silas Creed? He's not what you'd call a respectable gentleman." Rose felt the blood drain from her face as the terrible truth crashed over her. Silas Creed, the same Silas Creed who's been placing marriage advertisements and collecting mail-order brides for the past year, the station master confirmed grimly. "Ma'am, if you're here because of one of his letters, you need to know that the women who answer his advertisements tend to disappear. This ain't a good place for a lady and her children to be if Creed's got business with them." Rose's legs nearly gave out as she realized the full scope of the trap she had walked into. Silas Creed hadn't just been pursuing her across half the continent. He had been orchestrating her flight, guiding her toward this remote location where he could dispose of her and her daughters without interference from law enforcement or concerned neighbors. "Mama," Lucy's voice was small and frightened as she sensed her mother's distress. "What's wrong?" Rose forced herself to remain calm despite the terror coursing through her veins. She had escaped Creed once, she could do it again. But this time she had nowhere left to run and no money for further travel. "Is there somewhere safe we can stay?" Rose asked the station master desperately. "Somewhere Creed won't think to look for us." The station master considered for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "There's a man about 10 miles north of here, runs wild horses, and keeps to himself. Diego Morales. Folks call him Hawk on account of how he watches everything from a distance. He don't truck with Creed's operations, and he's got a reputation for helping folks who need it." "Would he help us?" Rose asked, though she wondered what kind of help a stranger might be willing to provide to a woman and children who had nothing to offer in return. "Diego's got reasons to dislike men like Creed." the station master replied cryptically. You tell him Charlie Winters sent you and that you need protection from Silas Creed. If anyone in this territory can keep you safe from that devil, it's Diego Morales. As Rose gathered her daughters and their meager possessions, preparing for yet another desperate flight into the unknown, she found herself thinking about the letter that had lured her to this remote place. Creed had signed it S. Creed, knowing that she would assume it came from some respectable settler, rather than the criminal who had murdered her husband and fabricated the debts that had driven her family to the edge of destruction. But if Diego Morales was willing to help them, perhaps her mistake might yet turn into salvation. Perhaps in this vast and beautiful desert, they could finally find the peace and safety that had eluded them for so long. The walk to Diego Morales' ranch took Rose and her daughters across country that was unlike anything they had ever seen. Red rock formations rose from the desert floor like ancient cathedrals, while vast stretches of grassland supported herds of wild horses that ran with a freedom that made Rose's heart ache with longing. Look, Mama, Lily whispered, as a group of mustangs thundered past in the distance, their manes and tails streaming like banners in the desert wind. They're so beautiful. And so free, Lucy added with the insight that marked her as the more observant of the twins. Rose nodded, understanding what her daughters were seeing. These horses lived without fences, without masters, without anyone trying to control or exploit them. It was exactly the kind of life Rose dreamed of providing for her girls, free from the constraints and dangers that had marked their existence in St. Louis. They created a ridge and saw the Morales Ranch spread out in the valley below them. It was not the grand operation Rose had somehow been expecting, but rather a collection of modest buildings surrounding natural corrals where dozens of horses moved with the easy grace of animals who were cared for rather than dominated. What caught Rose's attention immediately was the man working among the horses, tall and lean with the dark hair and features that spoke of Mexican heritage, moving with a fluid grace that suggested complete comfort in his environment. He worked alone, handling the powerful animals with patience and understanding rather than force. That must be Mr. Morales, Rose said, straightening her worn dress and trying to make herself and her daughters presentable, despite their long journey and desperate circumstances. As they approached the ranch buildings, the man looked up from his work with horses and studied them with intelligent, dark eyes that seemed to take in every detail of their appearance and condition. Rose felt herself being assessed with the same careful attention he had been giving the mustangs, and she wondered what conclusions he was drawing about three travel-worn females who had appeared uninvited at his isolated ranch. Ma'am, the man said, touching his hat brim with automatic courtesy. His voice carried a slight accent that was definitely Mexican, overlaid with the careful English of someone who had learned to navigate between two cultures. Can I help you, Mr. Morales? I'm Rose Patterson, and these are my daughters, Lucy and Lily. Charlie Winters at the train station said you might be able to help us. We're in some difficulty with Silas Creed. Diego Morales' expression darkened at the mention of Creed's name, and Rose saw his hands tighten unconsciously on the lead rope he was holding. What kind of difficulty? Rose hesitated, uncertain how much to tell this stranger who represented their only hope of refuge. Mr. Creed has been pursuing us for reasons that have nothing to do with legitimate business. Charlie thought you might know somewhere safe we could stay. Diego studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes moving from Rose to her daughters and back again. Rose could see him weighing options, calculating risks, deciding whether to involve himself in what was obviously a dangerous situation. How long since you've eaten? Diego asked finally, and Rose realized that her answer to this practical question would reveal more about their circumstances than any explanation she might offer. Yesterday morning, Lucy answered when Rose hesitated, her young voice steady despite their desperate circumstances. Diego's expression softened at the child's honesty, and Rose saw compassion replace wariness in his eyes. Well then, first things first. Can't discuss anything serious on empty stomachs. As Diego led them toward the ranch house, Rose found herself studying him with the same careful attention he had given them. He moved with the confident grace of someone completely at home in his environment, but there was something in his manner that suggested he was more accustomed to solitude than company. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, his manner courteous but reserved. The ranch house was modest but comfortable, with wide windows that looked out over the valley and the distant mountains. What struck Rose immediately was how clean and organized everything appeared, as if Diego maintained his living space with the same careful attention he gave it his horses. Sit, Diego said, gesturing toward a sturdy wooden table while he moved to the kitchen area with the efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for himself. I'll put together something to eat, and then you can tell me more about your situation with a creed. As Diego prepared a simple but substantial meal, Rose found herself relaxing for the first time since leaving St. Louis. There was something deeply peaceful about this place, something that spoke of honest work and simple living, far from the corruption and violence that had marked her recent experience. Mr. Morales, Rose said as they settled around the table to eat, Charlie Winters suggested that you might understand our need to avoid Mr. Creed. May I ask why? Diego was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes growing distant with what looked like painful memories. Silas Creed cost me my family's ranch, he said finally. Used false documents and corrupt officials to steal land that had been in my family for 3 generations. He's been working to drive out anyone who might challenge his operations in this area. Rose felt her heart sink as she realized the implications of Diego's words. Then helping us would put you at risk as well. We can't ask you to. You're not asking, Diego interrupted gently. I'm offering. Creed has taken enough from good people. It's time someone stood up to him. Lucy had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention that marked her as the more politically aware of the twins. Mr. Morales, what exactly does Mr. Creed do, besides steal ranches and chase families? Diego glanced at Rose, clearly seeking permission to speak honestly to the children about adult matters. Rose nodded, understanding that her daughters had already seen enough of the world's darkness to handle the truth. Creed runs what he calls a business empire, Diego explained carefully. He lends money to people who can't pay it back, then uses their debt to control them. He also collects people, women and children who find themselves in desperate circumstances. Collects them for what? Lily asked with the artistic sensitivity that made her more emotionally perceptive than her sister. For whatever purposes serve his interests, Diego replied grimly. Labor leverage against their families or simply to remove them as potential witnesses to his other activities. Rose felt sick as she realized how completely she had underestimated the danger they faced. Then there's nowhere we can go that would be truly safe. If he has the resources to track us across the continent, there might be one place, Diego said thoughtfully. But it would require trust, and it would mean accepting help that you might not be able to repay. What kind of help? Rose asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The kind where you stay here under my protection while we figure out a way to stop Creed permanently, Diego replied. I have resources he doesn't know about, connections he can't reach. But keeping you safe would mean making this your home for as long as necessary. Rose looked at her daughters, seeing hope beginning to bloom in their young faces for the first time in months. Then she looked at Diego Morales, this quiet, damaged man who was offering sanctuary to strangers at considerable risk to his own safety. Why? Rose asked simply. Why would you take such a risk for people you don't even know? Diego's smile was gentle but marked by old sadness. Because I know what it's like to lose everything to men like Creed. Because I know what it's like to run with no place to go. And because sometimes helping others is the only way to heal your own wounds. Rose felt tears pricking at her eyes as she realized that Diego Morales was offering them not just safety, but the possibility of building a real life in this beautiful, harsh country. Mr. Morales, we accept your offer, and we'll find ways to repay your kindness, I promise. Diego, he corrected gently, and you don't owe me anything except the chance to do something right for once in my life. As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to promise new beginnings, Rose Patterson felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. Hope for a future that held more than mere survival. She did not yet know that Silas Creed was already planning his next move, or that their greatest trials lay ahead. She did not know that her growing feelings for Diego Morales would be tested by revelations about both their pasts that would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other. All she knew was that for the first time since her husband's death, she and her daughters were truly safe. And perhaps in this vast and beautiful desert, they could finally stop running and start living. The mustangs called to each other across the valley As darkness fell, their voices carrying promises of freedom and wild spaces where the human heart could heal from even the deepest wounds. Rose Patterson listened to their song and dared to believe that her family's long exile might finally be coming to an end. 3 weeks into their stay at the Morales Ranch, Rose had begun to believe that perhaps they had finally found the peaceful refuge they had been seeking. Her daughters were thriving in the desert environment, learning to help with the horses and exploring the vast landscape with the fearless curiosity of children who had been given the gift of safety. Lucy had proven to have an intuitive understanding of horses that impressed even Diego, while Lily had taken to sketching the magnificent creatures with an artistic eye that captured their spirit as well as their physical beauty. Both girls were learning Spanish from Diego's elderly grandmother, Esperanza, who had arrived the previous week to help manage the household, and who had immediately claimed the twins as surrogate grandchildren. But it was Rose's own relationship with Diego that had surprised her most. What had begun as gratitude for his protection had slowly developed into something deeper and more complex. Diego Morales was unlike any man she had ever known, gentle with animals and children, but possessing an inner strength that she suspected could be formidable when circumstances required. He treated her as an equal partner in the ranch's operations, consulting her about household management and seeking her opinion on matters ranging from horse breeding to the education of her daughters. Most importantly, he never pressed for anything beyond friendship and partnership, never assumed that his protection gave him rights over her person or her decisions. After years of dealing with men who viewed her widowhood as an opportunity rather than a tragedy, Diego's respectful distance was both refreshing and increasingly frustrating. Mama Rosa, Esperanza said one morning, as they prepared breakfast together using the affectionate title she had adopted for Rose. My grandson watches you like a man dying of thirst watches water. Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks at the old woman's observation. I'm sure you're imagining things, Abuela. Diego is simply being kind to guests in need. Esperanza's laughter was knowing and musical. Child, I raised that boy from a baby. I know the difference between kindness and love. The question is whether you're brave enough to see what's right in front of you. Before Rose could formulate a response to Esperanza's pointed observation, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention to the main trail leading to the ranch. Rose felt her heart sink as she saw the dust cloud that indicated multiple horsemen coming fast, the kind of approach that usually meant trouble in frontier country. Diego, Rose called out as she moved to the window for a better view of the approaching riders. Diego emerged from the horse corrals with the alert tension of someone who had learned to expect danger from unexpected visitors. One look at his expression told Rose that he recognized the threat posed by the approaching group. How many? Diego asked, his voice calm, despite the obvious danger. 6, maybe 7. Rose replied, her own voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. They're riding hard like they know exactly where they're going. Diego nodded grimly and began moving toward the house with purposeful efficiency. Esperanza, take the girls to the back room and keep them quiet. Rose, can you handle a rifle? Yes, Rose replied without hesitation. Her late husband had taught her to shoot during their early marriage, and desperation had kept those skills sharp during the dangerous years following his death. As the riders drew closer, Rose could make out the familiar figure of Silas Creed at their head, his expensive clothes and polished manner, looking grotesquely out of place in the harsh desert landscape. Behind him rode 6 men whose hard faces and casual violence marked them as professional killers, the kind of men who made their living from other people's desperation. Mrs. Patterson, Creed called out as he drew his mount to a halt near the ranch house, his voice carrying the same oily politeness that had marked their encounters in St. Louis. How delightful to find you in such rustic surroundings. I trust you've been comfortable during your extended vacation. What do you want, Creed? Diego asked, stepping onto the front porch, with a rifle cradled casually in his arms. His posture suggested readiness rather than aggression, but Rose could see the coiled tension in his stance. Creed's pale eyes studied Diego with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing potential prey. You must be the half-breed horse trainer I've heard about. Diego Morales, isn't it? I believe you've been harboring property that belongs to me. I don't see any property here that belongs to you, Diego replied evenly. Just guests who are welcome to stay as long as they choose. Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, Creed said with the smile that Rose had learned to fear above all other expressions. Mrs. Patterson and her daughters are in my debt to the tune of several $1,000s. That debt gives me certain rights over their persons until the obligation is satisfied. Rose stepped onto the porch beside Diego, her own rifle held with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. The debts you claim we owe are fabricated, Creed. You know it, and I know it, and anyone who examines the documents closely will know it too. Creed's expression darkened at Rose's defiant response. Mrs. Patterson, you seem to have forgotten your place. Perhaps frontier life has given you ideas above your station. Perhaps frontier life has given me the courage to stand up to bullies and criminals. Rose replied, her tones growing stronger with each word. You murdered my husband, fabricated documents to steal our property, and drove us from our home with threats and violence. But that ends here. Does it indeed? Creed asked with malicious amusement. And what makes you think this establishment can provide protection that the law enforcement of St. Louis could not? Diego stepped slightly forward, his rifle shifting to a more ready position. Because out here we settle our own disputes. And because you're a long way from the corrupt officials and paid thugs that give you power in the city. Creed's laugh was cold as winter wind. Mr. Morales, you seem to labor under the misapprehension that I arrived alone. Perhaps you should look around more carefully before making threats you can't back up. It was then that Rose noticed the movement in the rocks above the valley floor, additional riders positioning themselves to surround the ranch buildings. Creed hadn't just brought the men she could see. He had deployed others to cut off any escape routes and create a crossfire that would make resistance futile. As you can see, Creed continued with evident satisfaction, I've come prepared for any eventuality. Now, Mrs. Patterson, you will gather your daughters and accompany me back to civilization, where we can discuss the terms of your debt repayment in greater detail. And if I refuse, Rose asked, though she suspected the answer would not be pleasant, then Mr. Morales and his establishment will suffer an unfortunate accident, Creed replied with casual cruelty. Fires are so common in this dry country, and accidents befall people who interfere in business matters that don't concern them. Rose felt trapped between impossible choices. Go with Creed and accept whatever fate he had planned for her and her daughters, or watch Diego and his property be destroyed by men who would kill without hesitation or remorse. But before she could formulate a response, a new voice cut through the tense confrontation from an unexpected direction. Silas Creed, the voice called out from the direction of the horse corrals, calm and authoritative, despite the obvious danger. You're under arrest for murder, fraud, and trafficking in human beings. Rose turned to see a group of mounted men emerging from concealment among the ranch buildings, their badges identifying them as federal marshals. At their head rode a man Rose recognized as Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley, whose pursuit of Creed's criminal network had been making headlines in newspapers across the Southwest. Marshal Bradley, Creed said with forced politeness, though Rose could see the calculation in his pale eyes as he weighed his options. How unexpected. I wasn't aware that federal authorities had jurisdiction over private debt collection. They do when the debts are fraudulent and the collection methods involve murder and kidnapping, Bradley replied grimly. We've been tracking your operations for months, Creed. Thanks to Mrs. Patterson's testimony and the evidence she provided, we finally have enough to put you away permanently. Rose stared at the federal marshal in confusion. Evidence I provided Marshal Bradley, I don't understand. When did I provide evidence? Bradley's smile was grim but satisfied. 3 weeks ago, when you sent that telegram to your sister in Kansas City asking her to contact federal authorities about your husband's murder. Your sister was quite thorough in her communications with our office. Rose felt a moment of confusion before understanding dawned. I didn't send any telegram to my sister. I don't have a sister in Kansas City. But I do, Diego said quietly, and Rose turned to see an expression of guilt and determination on his weathered features. Marshal Bradley, Mrs. Patterson, I owe you both an explanation. Creed's face had gone pale as he began to understand the true scope of the trap that had been laid for him. You planned this. The whole thing was a setup to draw me into the open. It was, Diego confirmed grimly. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to know that when you and your daughters arrived here, you walked into the middle of a federal operation that had been months in the planning. Marshal Bradley and I have been working together to gather evidence against Creed's network. Rose felt a chill of betrayal wash over her as she realized the implications of Diego's revelation. You mean our rescue was part of some elaborate scheme you've been using us as bait? No, Diego said firmly, his dark eyes meeting hers with desperate sincerity. I mean that I have been working with federal authorities to stop Creed, and when you arrived seeking protection, I saw an opportunity to help both you and the investigation. But Rose, everything else has been ruined. My feelings for you, my care for your daughters, my desire to keep you safe. None of that was part of any plan. Before Rose could process Diego's words or respond to his declaration, Creed made his move. Rather than surrender to federal authorities, he spurred his horse forward in a desperate attempt to reach Rose and use her as a human shield in his escape attempt. But Creed had underestimated both Rose's determination and her marksmanship skills. The rifle shot that echoed across the valley was hers, taking Creed's horse out from under him and sending the criminal tumbling to the ground with a force that left him stunned and helpless. That was for my husband, Rose said grimly, as federal marshals moved in to secure Creed and his associates, and for every family you have destroyed with your greed and cruelty. The arrest of Silas Creed and the dismantling of his criminal network should have been a moment of pure triumph for Rose, but instead she felt confused and betrayed by Diego's revelation about his cooperation with federal authorities. As the marshals led Creed away in chains and his hired guns surrendered or fled, Rose found herself wondering how much of her time at the ranch had been genuine hospitality and how much had been carefully orchestrated manipulation. Rose, Diego said quietly as the immediate excitement began to die down. We need to talk. There are things you need to understand about why I helped the marshals and things I need to tell you about my own reasons for wanting Creed stopped. I think I understand enough, Rose replied, her voice cold with hurt and disappointment. You used my family's desperation to further your own agenda. You let us believe we were safe here when we were actually being used as bait to draw out a dangerous criminal. That's not how it happened, Diego protested, moving closer despite the obvious anger in Rose's posture. Rose, please let me explain. Mama, Lucy's voice came from the doorway as she and Lily emerged from their hiding place, their young faces bright with excitement over the dramatic events they had witnessed. Are we safe now? Is the bad man really gone? Rose looked at her daughters and felt her anger transform into protective determination. Whatever Diego's motivations had been, whatever complicated schemes he had been involved in, her primary responsibility remained unchanged, keeping her girls safe and building a stable future for their family. Yes, loves, Rose said, gathering Lucy and Lily into her arms. The bad man is gone, and he can't hurt us anymore. Does that mean we can stay here forever? Lily asked with the hopeful innocence of a child who had found happiness in an unexpected place. Rose looked at Diego, seeing pain and regret in his dark eyes, then at the vast desert landscape that had begun to feel like home. I don't know, sweetheart. We'll have to see what happens next. But privately, Rose was already making plans to leave the ranch as soon as it was safe to travel. She had learned not to trust in happiness that came too easily, and Diego's revelation about his cooperation with federal authorities had shattered the illusion of safety and acceptance she had begun to build around their time in New Mexico. That evening, as the girls helped Esperanza prepare a celebration dinner for Creed's capture, Rose walked alone among the horse corrals, trying to sort through her conflicted feelings about Diego and their situation. The mustangs moved restlessly in the gathering darkness, sensing the emotional turmoil of the humans around them. They know when something's wrong, Diego said quietly as he approached across the sandy ground. Horses are sensitive to human emotions. Unlike some humans, Rose replied without turning around, who are apparently quite skilled at hiding their true motives behind masks of kindness and hospitality. Diego was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of painful honesty. Rose, I need you to know the truth about everything. About why I was working with the marshals, about what Creed took from my family, about why stopping him became the most important thing in my life. Despite her anger and hurt, Rose found herself curious about Diego's story. What did he take from you? Everything, Diego said simply. My family's ranch, my parents' graves, my grandfather's legacy, my place in both the Mexican and American communities. But most importantly, he took my sister. Rose turned to face Diego, fully seeing anguish in his expression that went deeper than mere financial loss. Your sister, Elena, was 16, beautiful, full of dreams about seeing the world beyond our isolated valley. Diego continued, his voice rough with old grief. When Creed began pressuring our family to sell our land, she disappeared one night. We found evidence that she had been taken, but no trace of where she had been taken to. Rose felt her anger beginning to transform into understanding as she realized the depth of Diego's personal motivation for stopping Creed. You've been searching for her. For 3 years, Diego confirmed, working with Marshall Bradley, gathering information about Creed's network, trying to find some trace of Elena or the other women who've disappeared into his operations. And when my daughters and I arrived here, you saw an opportunity to use us to further your search, Rose said, though her voice had lost its earlier coldness. I saw an opportunity to protect people I was beginning to care about while also gathering evidence against the man who destroyed my family, Diego corrected gently. Rose, everything I told you about wanting to help was true. Everything I've felt for you and the girls has been genuine. But I also won't lie to you about having my own reasons for wanting Creed stopped. Rose studied Diego's face in the gathering darkness, seeing sincerity and vulnerability beneath his weathered features. Have you found any trace of Elena? Marshall Bradley thinks she might have been sold to brothel operators in California, Diego replied, his voice breaking slightly. If she's still alive, if we can find her, there might be a chance to bring her home. Rose felt her heart clench with sympathy for Diego's pain and her own guilt at having judged him so harshly for having complex motivations. Diego, I'm sorry. I was so focused on my own feelings of betrayal that I didn't consider what you might have suffered at Creed's hands. You had every right to feel betrayed, Diego said firmly. I should have told you from the beginning about my cooperation with federal authorities. I should have given you the choice of whether to be part of the operation against Creed. And would you have, Rose asked. If I had said I wanted no part of it, would you have let us leave to find safety elsewhere? Diego's answer came without hesitation. Yes, Rose, keeping you and your daughters safe was more important to me than any investigation. If you had wanted to go, I would have helped you find another place where Creed couldn't reach you. Rose believed him. Looking into Diego's honest dark eyes, she could see the truth of his words and the genuine regret he felt for having kept secrets from her. More importantly, she could see the love he had been too careful to express directly. Love that had motivated his protection as much as his desire for justice. Diego, Rose said softly, what happens now? Creed is captured, his network is being dismantled, and my daughters and I are finally free from the threat that drove us from our home. But what happens to us? What happens to whatever this has been between us? Diego stepped closer, his expression hopeful but cautious. That depends on what you want to happen, Rose. You're free now, free to go anywhere, build any kind of life you choose. But if you wanted to stay, if you thought you could be happy here, I'd like very much to spend my life trying to deserve your trust and your love. Rose looked around at the ranch that had become more of a home than anywhere she had lived since her husband's death, then at the man who had protected her family and helped her find her own strength and courage. What about your search for Elena? What about the need to rebuild your family's legacy? Elena will always be my sister, and I'll never stop hoping to find her, Diego said honestly. But Rose, I've learned that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who choose to stand with you, who share your struggles and your dreams. You and Lucy and Lily have become my family if you'll have me. Rose felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that Diego was offering her something she had thought was lost forever. The chance to be part of a real partnership with someone who saw her as an equal, who valued her strength as much as her kindness, who would help her build a future rather than simply provide temporary shelter. Diego Morales, Rose said, stepping closer to take his scarred hands in hers. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day we met. I think my daughters have been hoping you'd become their stepfather since the first week we were here. And I think this desert with its wild horses and vast skies and beautiful freedom is exactly where we're meant to build our lives. Diego's kiss was tender and joyful, full of promise and hope, and the deep satisfaction of two people who had found their match in the most unexpected circumstances. When they separated, both were crying with happiness. Does this mean you'll marry me? Diego asked with the shy hope of a man who had never dared to believe he deserved such happiness. It means I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else or with anyone else. Rose replied with a smile that outshone the stars beginning to emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. As they stood together among the Mustang corrals listening to the horses call to each other across the valley, Rose Patterson realized that her long journey as a refugee was finally over. She had found not just safety, but love, partnership, and the kind of freedom she had only dreamed was possible. Tomorrow would bring the practical challenges of building a life together, of blending two cultures and two wounded hearts into something strong enough to weather any storm. But tonight, surrounded by the wild beauty of the desert and the promise of Diego's love, Rose was content to believe that some stories truly did end with happily ever after. The Mustang's voices carried across the valley like a benediction, welcoming her home to a place where her daughters could grow up free and strong, where her own heart could heal from the wounds of loss and fear, where love could bloom even in the harshest desert if it was tended with patience and care. Rose Patterson had come to New Mexico as a desperate fugitive. She would remain as Rose Morales' partner to a good man and mother to children who would grow up knowing that love was stronger than fear, that family was built on choice rather than obligation, and that sometimes the most beautiful roses bloomed in the most unexpected places. 1 year after Silas Creed's arrest and imprisonment, Rose stood in the doorway of the adobe house she and Diego had built together, watching her daughters work with the Mustangs in the early morning light. Lucy had developed into a skilled horse trainer under Diego's patient tutelage, while Lily had discovered a gift for veterinary medicine that impressed even the territorial doctor who visited their valley monthly. The ranch had prospered beyond anything Rose had imagined possible when she first arrived as a desperate refugee. Diego's reputation as a horse breeder had spread throughout the Southwest, drawing buyers from as far away as California and Texas. But more importantly, their partnership had created something neither could have achieved alone: a refuge for people seeking fresh starts, a place where cultural differences were celebrated rather than feared, a home where love and respect formed the foundation of everything they built together. "Senora Rosa," came a familiar voice behind her, and Rose turned to see Esperanza approaching with a letter in her weathered hands. This came with a supply wagon from Santa Fe. It has government markings. Rose accepted the letter with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Official correspondence usually meant complications, and she had grown to treasure the peaceful routine of their ranch life. But as she read the contents, her expression grew bright with excitement and hope. "Diego," Rose called out toward the horse corrals, "you need to see this." Diego approached with the easy stride of a man completely at home in his environment, his dark eyes questioning as he saw Rose's obvious excitement. "What is it, amor?" Rose handed him the letter, watching his face carefully as he read the official notification from the territorial marshal's office. She saw surprise, then wonder, then a joy so profound that it brought tears to her eyes. "Elena," Diego whispered, his voice thick with emotion. They found Elena. The letter was from Marshal Bradley, informing them that Creed's network had finally been completely unraveled, leading to the rescue of dozens of women who had been forced into various forms of slavery throughout the Southwest. Elena Morales had been found in a brothel in San Francisco alive and relatively unharmed despite 3 years of captivity. "She's coming home," Diego said, his voice breaking with relief and gratitude. "Rose, my sister, is coming home." Rose threw her arms around her husband, sharing his joy and relief, while privately wondering how Elena's return might change the family dynamics they had worked so hard to establish. The Elena who returned would not be the 16-year-old girl who had been taken from the family ranch 3 years earlier. She would be a young woman who had survived horrors that might have changed her in fundamental ways. "When?" Rose asked as they separated. "Next week," Diego replied, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Marshal Bradley is escorting her personally, along with several other rescued women who need medical attention and safe places to recover." Rose felt a surge of maternal protectiveness at the mention of women needing care and refuge. "Then we'll need to prepare. Extra beds, medical supplies, counseling, support for people who have been through traumatic experiences." Diego's smile was radiant with love and admiration. "Rosa, this is exactly why I knew you were meant to be part of this family. You don't just think about our own happiness. You think about how we can help heal others." Over the following week, the Morales Ranch was transformed into a reception center for the rescued women. Rose worked tirelessly to prepare comfortable accommodations, while Diego and the ranch hands modified buildings to ensure privacy and security for people who might struggle with crowds or sudden noises. Lucy and Lily threw themselves into the preparations with enthusiasm, helping to organize supplies and learning Spanish phrases that might comfort women who had been isolated from their families and cultures for years. Esperanza became the unofficial grandmother to everyone on the ranch, providing the kind of stable maternal presence that traumatized people needed to begin healing. When Marshal Bradley's convoy finally arrived, Rose felt her heart clench with sympathy for the group of women who stepped down from the wagons. They moved with the careful wariness of people who had learned not to trust easily, their eyes holding the kind of shadows that came from experiences too dark for ordinary conversation. But it was the young woman who emerged last from the lead wagon who commanded Rose's immediate attention. Elena Morales had her brother's dark eyes and proud carriage, but there was a brittleness to her manner that spoke of survival purchased at enormous cost. She was beautiful despite the hardships she had endured, but her beauty was now armored with defenses that would take time and patience to dismantle. "Elena," Diego breathed, stepping forward with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Elena studied her brother for a long moment, taking in the changes that 3 years had wrought in both their appearances and circumstances. When she finally smiled, it was tentative but genuine, the first crack in the armor she had built around her heart. "Diego," Elena said softly, allowing herself to be gathered into her brother's embrace. "You look good, hermano, happy." "I am happy," Diego replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And now that you're home, I'm complete." Rose watched the reunion with mixed feelings. Joy for Diego's obvious relief and happiness, concern for Elena's emotional state, and uncertainty about her own place in the family dynamic that was about to be reestablished. Elena was Diego's sister, the last remaining member of his birth family, the person he had spent 3 years searching for and dreaming of rescuing. Where did that leave his chosen family? "Elena Lumena," Diego said as he released his sister from their embrace. "I want you to meet my wife Rosa, and my daughters, Lucy and Lily." Elena's eyes moved to Rose with careful assessment, taking in everything from her practical clothing to her confident bearing to the obvious love that existed between her and Diego. "Your wife," Elena repeated as if testing the concept. "And daughters." "Stepdaughters," Rose corrected, gently uncertain whether Elena would view her presence as an intrusion on family territory. "But yes, we've become a family during the time you were away." Elena nodded slowly, her expression unreadable as she processed this information. "And our grandmother, Abuela Esperanza. She lives with us now," Diego explained. "She helps manage the household and has become the heart of our extended family here." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Esperanza emerged from the ranch house with her arms wide and tears streaming down her lined face. "Elena, mi niña, my precious child, you've come home to us." The embrace between Elena and her grandmother was fierce and desperate, two women who had survived loss and separation, finding comfort in the continuity of family love. Rose felt tears stinging her own eyes as she witnessed the healing power of unconditional acceptance and belonging. "Abuela," Elena whispered against the old woman's shoulder. "I thought I would never see you again. I thought I would die in that place without ever coming home." "You're home now, Niña," Esperanza said firmly, holding Elena at arm's length to study her face with the sharp eyes of someone who understood both trauma and recovery. "You're home, and you're safe, and you're loved. Everything else can be healed with time and patience." Over the following weeks, Rose watched Elena struggle to find her place in the family that had grown and changed during her absence. The young woman was clearly grateful for her rescue and eager to reconnect with her surviving family members, but she was also wary of emotional vulnerability and suspicious of happiness that might be taken away without warning. Her relationship with Rose was particularly complex. Elena clearly recognized that Rose had made Diego happy and had provided stability for the family during difficult times, but there was also an undercurrent of territorial competition for Diego's attention and loyalty. "She doesn't trust me," Rose confided to Diego one evening as they walked among the mustang corrals after Elena had retired early with another of her frequent headaches. "I understand why. I'm an outsider who moved into her family space while she was gone. But I don't know how to help her feel secure here without making myself feel like an intruder." Diego was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled as he considered the delicate dynamics affecting his extended family. Elena has been through things that changed her in ways I'm still trying to understand, he said finally. She's not the same trusting, open-hearted girl who was taken from us 3 years ago. But Rosa, you're not an intruder. You're my wife, my partner, my equal in everything we've built here. Elena will have to learn to accept that, just as we'll have to learn to help her heal. And if she can't, Rose asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart, what if Elena never accepts our marriage or feels comfortable with our family? What if helping her heal means choosing between your sister and your wife? Diego stopped walking and turned to face Rose fully, his hands framing her face with the gentle intensity that never failed to reassure her. Rosa, listened to me carefully. I love my sister, and I will do everything in my power to help her recover from her ordeal. But you are my wife, my partner, my chosen family. Elena will never come between us, no matter how difficult her recovery proves to be. Rose believed him, but she also understood that family loyalties were complex, especially when they involved trauma and survival. She resolved to be patient with Elena's defensive behavior while continuing to build the loving home that had become the foundation of her own happiness. The crisis that tested all their relationships came 3 weeks after Elena's return, triggered by what should have been a moment of celebration and joy. Rose had just received confirmation that she was pregnant with her and Diego's first child together, news that filled her with excitement and anticipation for the family they were continuing to build. She had planned to share the news at dinner surrounded by the people who had become her closest family. But when she announced her pregnancy, Elena's reaction was swift and devastating. So now you'll have a real family, Elena said with bitter coldness, her dark eyes bright with pain and accusation. Real children to replace the ones you lost, a real wife to replace the sister who was inconvenient enough to get kidnapped. The silence that followed Elena's words was thick with shock and hurt. Rose felt as if she had been physically struck, while Diego's face flushed with anger at his sister's cruelty. Elena, Diego said with dangerous quiet, you will apologize to my wife immediately. Why? Elena shot back, her composure finally cracking to reveal the raw pain beneath her careful control. For saying what everyone's thinking, that you've replaced your real family with strangers who happen to need rescue. Elena, Esperanza's voice cut through the confrontation with the authority of someone who would tolerate no disrespect for family harmony. That is enough. You will not speak to Rosa in such a manner in this house. But the damage was already done. Rose felt tears streaming down her face as Elena's words touched every insecurity she had harbored about her place in Diego's life. Had he really married her out of love or out of loneliness and the need to fill the spaces left by his missing family members? I think, Rose said with as much dignity as she could manage, that I should give you time to sort through family matters. Girls, why don't you help me pack our things? Rosa, no, Diego said desperately, reaching for her as she stood to leave the table. You're not going anywhere. This is your home, our home. Is it? Rose asked, looking at Elena's stricken face and Diego's anguished expression. Or am I just convenient temporary family until the real family could be restored? Before anyone could answer, Lucy stood up from her place at the table, her young face set with determination. Elena, she said with the clear voice of someone who had decided to speak truth regardless of consequences, you're wrong about us. Lucy, Rose began, but her daughter held up a hand to indicate she wasn't finished. You're wrong about us being replacement family, Lucy continued, addressing Elena directly. And you're wrong about Diego marrying Mama for the wrong reasons. I've watched them together every day for a year, and I've seen how he looks at her, how he talks to her, how he trusts her with everything important in his life. That's not replacement love. That's real love. Lily nodded firmly in support of her sister's words. And we're not replacement daughters either. Diego chose to love us not because you weren't here, but because that's the kind of man he is. Someone who makes room in his heart for people who need family. Elena stared at the twins in surprise, clearly not expecting such articulate defiance from children she had dismissed as temporary additions to her family. Furthermore, Lucy continued with the logical precision that made her formidable in any argument. You're being selfish and cruel to people who saved your brother's life and gave him reasons to be happy while he was searching for you. Do you really think he would have been better off spending 3 years alone and miserable instead of building something beautiful with people who love him? Elena's face crumpled as Lucy's words penetrated her defensive anger, and forced her to confront the reality of what she was trying to destroy. I just, I missed so much. I came back and everything was different. Everyone was different. I don't know where I fit anymore. Rose felt her heart break for Elena's obvious pain and confusion. Setting aside her own hurt feelings, she moved around the table to kneel beside Elena's chair, taking the young woman's hands in her own. "Elena," Rose said gently, "you fit wherever you choose to fit. This family has room for everyone who wants to be part of it. Your brother didn't replace you. He expanded his capacity for love while he waited for you to come home. There's a difference." Elena looked into Rose's eyes, searching for any trace of deception or manipulation. What she found was genuine compassion and the offer of sisterhood without conditions or competition. "I don't know how to be part of a family anymore," Elena whispered, her voice breaking with vulnerability. "I spent 3 years learning to survive by trusting no one, depending on no one, protecting myself from everyone. I don't know how to let people love me." "You learned the same way we all learned," Esperanza said gently, her weathered hand stroking Elena's dark hair. "One day at a time, one moment of trust at a time, one choice to believe in love instead of fear." Diego knelt on Elena's other side, his own eyes bright with tears. "Elena, you're my sister, my blood, part of my heart that was torn away when you were taken. But Rosa is my wife, my partner, my choice to build something new and strong. I need both of you in my life, but I won't choose between you. We're all family now if we're brave enough to make it work." Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her. Her brother's love and determination, her grandmother's patient wisdom, Rose's generous forgiveness, and the twins' fierce loyalty to the family they had all chosen together. For the first time since her rescue, she allowed herself to hope that healing might be possible. "I'm sorry," Elena said, turning to Rose with tears streaming down her face. "Rosa, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve my anger, and your children didn't deserve my cruelty. I was just, I was so afraid that there wouldn't be room for me." Rose gathered Elena into her arms, holding the broken young woman with the same protective tenderness she showed her own daughters. "Elena, there's always room for family. Always. And you're going to be an aunt soon, which means this baby will need all the love and protection we can provide." "An aunt," Elena repeated wonderingly, as if she had never considered the possibility of positive family roles awaiting her return. "The best aunt," Lucy declared firmly. "Someone who can teach the baby about horses and courage and how to be strong even when bad things happen." Over the months that followed, Elena's integration into their expanded family proved to be a journey of small steps and gradual healing. There were setbacks and difficult moments, times when her trauma manifested in ways that tested everyone's patience and understanding. But there were also breakthrough moments of connection and joy, times when Elena's natural warmth and intelligence shone through the defensive walls she had built around her heart. She developed a special bond with Lily, recognizing in the artistic girl a kindred spirit who understood the value of beauty in a harsh world. She became Lucy's partner in horse training, marveling at the young woman's intuitive understanding of animal psychology. Most importantly, she learned to see Rose not as a usurper of family affection, but as the woman who had saved her brother's happiness and given him the strength to continue searching for her. When Rose and Diego's son was born on a crisp autumn morning, Elena was among the first to hold him, tears streaming down her face as she realized that love truly did multiply rather than divide when families chose to welcome new members. "He's perfect," Elena whispered as the baby's tiny fingers wrapped around hers. "What will you name him?" "Esperanza," Rose said with a smile. "Suggested we name him Refugio." Refuge. Because this family has been a refuge for all of us. "Refugio Morales," Elena repeated, testing the sound of her nephew's name. "I like it. A name that honors where we've been and where we're going." As the years passed, the Morales Ranch became known throughout the Southwest as a place where people could find refuge, healing, and the chance to build new lives from the fragments of what they had lost. Rose's medical skills, Diego's understanding of horses and land management, Elena's gradual emergence as a teacher and counselor, and the twins' various talents all contributed to creating something larger than any of them could have achieved alone. Lucy grew up to become one of the territory's most skilled horse trainers, while Lily developed into an artist whose paintings of Western life brought recognition to their isolated valley. Elena eventually married a gentle doctor who had come to work with trauma survivors, and together they established the territory's first specialized clinic for people recovering from violence and exploitation. Refugio grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable with Mexican traditions and American innovations, equally at home on horseback or in the growing cities of the Southwest. He became a bridge between communities that had historically been suspicious of each other, helping to build the kind of integrated society that his parents had dreamed of creating. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement of the Morales family was simply their demonstration that love could indeed bloom in the harshest desert if it was tended with patience, courage, and the determination to see each other's humanity despite cultural differences and past traumas. Rose had come to New Mexico as a desperate fugitive, seeking only survival for herself and her children. She remained as the matriarch of an extended family that included not just her biological and adopted children, but the dozens of people who found refuge and renewal at the ranch that became known as the place where broken hearts learned to heal. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the family gathered on the portal to watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Rose would sometimes remember that terrified woman who had fled St. Louis with nothing but her daughters and a mother's desperate courage. That woman had believed she was running toward an unknown future that might hold nothing but fresh dangers and disappointments. She could never have imagined that her flight would lead to this: a love that transcended cultural boundaries, a family that chose each other every day, a home where the wild horses sang their freedom songs under stars that seemed close enough to touch. Any regrets, Diego would sometimes ask, holding her hand as they watched their children and grandchildren play in the gathering darkness. Only one, Ma, Rose would reply with the smile that had become her signature response. I regret all the years I spent believing that happiness was something that happened to other people. But I'm grateful for every moment since I learned better. And in the distance, the Mustangs would call to each other across the Boyne, their voices carrying promises of freedom, belonging, and the eternal possibility that love could bloom anywhere if brave hearts were willing to tend it with patience and hope. Rose Patterson had become Rose Morales, and in doing so had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grew not in protected gardens, but in the harsh, honest soil of the desert, where only the strongest roots could find water and only the most determined blooms could survive to spread their seeds on the endless wind. The roses had found their desert, and the desert had learned to bloom.